Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. I'm your host, Cher Downing, and I'm here to introduce today Connie Steele. Welcome, Connie.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Very excited to have you here today for a couple of reasons. Connie runs a firm with some partners that she's going to talk to us about, and also is going to talk to us about her podcast, and lastly, her new book that's coming out. So we'll go ahead and get started with Connie. I'll let you introduce your company and talk to us a little bit about your background and how you got to this point.
Sure. So I'm a seasoned marketing and strategy executive and have a passion for building brands, products, and experiences. I run my own management consultancy called Flywheel Associates, and that's where I help scale up companies not only develop their business and marketing strategies, but also drive the successful execution of these efforts. And I'm also an avid podcaster, just like you, Cher.
Yay!
And I'm actually the creator and host of Strategic Momentum. It's a podcast and e-learning brand focused on understanding the business of work to support the next generation of leaders in reaching their full growth potential. And how I even got to this place, it's been a windy journey, I guess I would say. Definitely not a linear and sequential one like I initially started with. But as a Chinese American born to immigrant parents, academics was a focus in our household, specifically mathematically oriented subjects, sort of true to the stereotype. But so in college and in grad school, I pursued heavily quantitative degrees. In fact, I have a math and statistics degree, but I wanted to have an application. So I didn't know what I was going to do with it. My father had pushed for me to pursue statistics because he happens to have a PhD in that. I liked it because of an application to math. But again, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this? The expectation is I have to go to grad school. Thinking, what am I going to apply for? So true story. I went to the library, looked up vocational books, read about marketing, and I realized, wait, here is a relevant application where I could marry the quantitative side, understand how the numbers can bring to life decisions on the products and services that you see on the shelf. So I was hooked. I went to graduate school for applied statistics degree so that I could be a marketing researcher, and then ultimately started my career at a top-notch consumer packaged goods company. But the web was big at the time, and I quickly realized that being in a stable, great company, learning about consumers and building different flavors, packaging of food wasn't my thing. Actually, I got bored. So I was reading so much about the web, saw how much it was changing people's behavior already, and decided I wanted to make a pivot, that I wanted to move away from a more siloed, quantitative, narrow discipline, also in a discipline that felt more limited to me, to one where it was going to be constantly growing. I knew what the future would bring, and I wanted to use the right brain side of me, of which I always knew was there, but was somewhat latent. So switched over to AOL and had the amazing opportunity to work in a lot of different disciplines. I got a chance to test and learn, actually, throughout my career. And I've been in tech ever since and have worked subsequently for other tech companies running marketing organizations. But I decided to make yet another pivot. about 9 years ago. Many people may relate to this, but was in a really demanding job. It was a very challenging environment. My children were really young and I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't growing in the way that I wanted. So I made that decision to leave and thought, I'm going to try consulting. I want to take back control of my life and find a different way to work, because this focus on an organization and putting all of myself, which was 70 to 90 hour weeks, it was difficult being that executive, part of the C-suite, and realizing that that part of my life was dominating more. And I couldn't find the balance that I truly was looking for. So it wasn't common for many people at that time to just leave, but I knew that was the best decision for me and my family. And so that has led me to where I am today, running my own consultancy.
That is so exciting, because I think particularly in the ed tech space, we're seeing a lot of people who are now starting to move away from the traditional roles or working the 9 to 5 and branching out, doing what they want to do and taking advantage of their skill set, their interest in designing, in putting out materials like gamers that can do animation and such. I think one of the things we're seeing more and more of is, as we're using more and more artificial intelligence and 3D animation and other animation products, even just within our daily lives in our homes, that there's a need for designers out there. There's a need for people to work on different things. So the opportunity to step off the diving board and plunge in, I think you're a testament to doing that. I've done that as well. And it's scary, but it's also really invigorating and really fulfilling to be in charge of your own destiny. And that, I think, for our listeners is so important to hear about. Talk to us a little bit about, you recently did a study this past summer, because you still are a researcher at heart, which is why I love you. All of us that are previous academics of some sort, we cannot release the research. We have to keep doing it. But I think this ties into your background and what we've just been talking about, in the sense of states of careers, success. What does success mean to individuals? So tell us a little bit about what you did. And I know it's going to be on your podcast, which I believe you said is released today, so people can be able to hear that. And we'll be sure to post the link to that on our site when it goes out. But talk to us a little bit about that research study.
Absolutely. So I've noticed, obviously, this substantial shift in how people were viewing their career and managing their career based on all the interviews they had done over the years. But personally, being one who has been fascinated by studying the future of work, and that had stemmed from an amazing interaction with an individual who happened to be the CMO of Macromedia Flash during my time at a company called Network Solutions. So that was, maybe 10 years ago. But since then, since he introduced me to that, I have been paying attention and evaluating the pulse of what's been going on, and have noticed that particularly the millennial generation has viewed what they want out of work fundamentally differently. Their career goals weren't siloed and narrow anymore. Whereas in the past, particularly when I know I was starting out, it was title, it was career progression based on maybe more impact and power, or really driven by money and income stability, but people wanted to make it big. That wasn't the focus anymore. What I saw, and many people know, that there is a desire to find purpose, to align passion, to find their interest. Yet they were also pursuing multiple avenues. We know that there's statistics out there that talk about how 64% of millennials have a side hustle or have been thinking about a side hustle. And that number is even higher for Gen Zers. So just with all these factors that were happening, and me having been in technology and seeing the change of behavior, I wanted to just get a pulse on how do people define work and career success today. So we did a study. We got over 430 people to take part. It was a sample of those age 22 to 58. Our focus originally was millennials and Gen Xers, but we decided to bleed outside that a bit so that we could capture those Gen Zers that were entering the workforce, but also those boomers. And just what we found is that the data reflected and supported the hypothesis that there is no one definition around a career. People, regardless of what decade they were in, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, had varying definitions. Some were focused on an aspiration that they were looking for or they were trying to pursue. Others were very definitive and almost providing a specific title. Some were saying it was a journey. Others were talking about it's the current state that they're in. But when we did give them very specific definitions, money wasn't at the top. It was more about job satisfaction and being able to leverage their skills to do the work. Money, I believe we had 7 or 8 specific definitions, was more in the middle, but it didn't rise to the top. The other questions and other areas, I should say, that we focused on were asking career goals. Because again, our hypothesis was that it wasn't one-dimensional. We also asked questions around what were the traits, characteristics, skills that were needed to advance one's career. And also, in converse, what were the ones that detracted or were inhibitors to one's career, as well as just general attitudes and perceptions. And what we found in terms of goals, it did vary depending on whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, but it aligned as well with where you are in your career stage. So naturally, when you're in your 20s, you're in that establishment phase. You're trying things. You don't know a lot yet, but there are just some fundamental needs that you have. You want to make money, right? And you're looking to build those skills. But it shifts in your 30s because you're now in this advancement stage. You're building them. You're growing. And what was interesting is you started to see impact. I want to have an impact. And in your 40s, you've now worked for some time. And those goals actually were even more expansive. They were looking to really not only just have impact, but they realize the importance of being able to bring their whole selves to work, have alignment of passion and purpose, which many of us who have worked for some time, I think, share, you and I can fundamentally relate to. So it's very fascinating to see that shift. But when you went into that period of your 50s, you shift maybe from a advancement maintenance sort of stage in your 40s to potentially more of this maintenance stage. So those goals are a bit more primal. And then when we asked about, what were those factors that could help advance your career? What was fascinating to us was that soft skills actually came to the top pretty much across all of them. And that was not something that was an emphasis whatsoever 10, 15, 20 years ago. It was definitely about the hard skills. Sure. I'm sure you can 100%, prove that to having been in education, being an expert in education, that it was, again, these very specific hard skills, being very narrow and very deep, the specialization. Soft skills is very expansive. To be able to communicate effectively, to problem solve, to have this growth mindset, that's really necessary in this virtual world that we're in. But it was just fascinating to see that came to the top.
I think that's so interesting. The entire study is fascinating to me because as someone who's supervised people for 30 plus years, I've seen the changes on the other side of the table. I've had the conversations where we've said, well, if we hire that person, we'd have to bring them in at less money than what they're currently making. So they're probably not going to take the job. Knowing the mindset of you always want to move up. So on paper, you're looking progressive. And so as much as we wanted that candidate, we knew the likelihood was they weren't going to come to us because once it was on paper, they'd have to explain that the next time they went for a new role. Well, why did you decrease dollars kind of thing? In education, you can do it when you change the type of institution. So if you say, well, I was at a major university and I went to a community college, they go, oh, okay, because community colleges don't pay as much. So there's this instant answer. which may or may not be true, but we have these resolves on file, as I call them. And so you look at them and you go, oh, okay, fine. And so I think back to in the 60s and 70s, education was very minimalized in terms of accessibility. And there was a lot of liberal arts colleges. There was a lot of learning and understanding, and the hard sciences were there, but there was a lot given towards soft skills, innovation, creative thinking, think outside the box. We got to the late 70s and 80s, and it became all about the me generation. What's in it for me? And so I need skills, and I need skills that are going to make me different than the person sitting next to me interviewing for the same job. And at the same time, colleges opened up more and more. More people could go to college, but it didn't mean they could afford to go to college. So financial aid became very prevalent, and colleges and universities started saying they've got to get out in 4 years. We can't have them carrying on and on. And if they fail a class or they take a term off, or, all these things became relative. They get out of sequence in a program. So soft skills started being cut because we need to cram in everything that they need for a core foundation. So we can say statistically across the board, everyone has taken 2 Englishes and 3 maths and whatever that was needed. And then on top of that was your 2 years of major courses. And we've got to get you through. And if you're choosing a specialization, great. Now you've added on more courses. So where's the wiggle room? Because we're going to guarantee you're going to get out in 4 years. So little by little, we ebbed away at those individual soft skill courses. And we said, we'll divvy this up and put it in every course. So every course should be teaching some of these things. Well, by the 90s, it was clear we weren't doing that because we didn't have enough time. And then in the 90s, we started getting into technology. So by the 2000s, now students want courses offered at different levels and different ways, different delivery methods. There are students in this day and age who an average semester is 15 credits. They'll take 23, 24, 26 credits. If they're an A student and doing well, they can get an override. The premise for success is if I set my schedule to take 3 or 4 8-week classes and 2 6-week classes and 1 full semester class, because that's my hardest class, I'm never carrying more than 18 hours at a time. Because this set of classes ends in 8 weeks, and then I start a new set of classes. So they've become very savvy. They have figured out how to push more curriculum into a semester, but they're still carrying a normal load. They're very, very sharp at this. The A students have figured this out. And between that and coming in with AP courses from high school, which is college equivalency, they're getting done really, really fast. So their thought is, I can get out in 3 years instead of 4. And now I'm already in the market. Either I'm getting a master's or I'm getting entry level into a Fortune 500 company. And so they are really driving at this in the 90s and the end of 90s and early 2000s. So we saw this shift. And as the technology got better, it made it even easier and even easier. And then about 2010, students came in and started saying, but what am I getting out of this? How am I enjoying this? Well, what type of careers can I do with this major? Well, what are other options? I mean, what if I don't want to go work for a Fortune 500 company? What if I don't want to go work for a school? And career areas were going, how do we answer this? So we started seeing the shift of the mindset of, I'm still going to get out early because I don't want to incur a lot of debt, and I know that I can do it, and I want to pick up extra courses. Some people will stay and take another extra year just to get more specialization of things that they want. Many of them will take soft skill classes as workshops and such because they want to see that. But they didn't figure out how to find what they wanted out there, so they started creating it. They started saying, okay, how can I build what I want to do? So I love your study because it really confirms what I've kind of observed for many, many years was just this shift and change in our mindset as we're coming out of college. which one is parents are different. Every generation, parents have a different outlook, a different experience, a different understanding. Technology is impacting what we're doing continuously. We are global now. So to talk to somebody in Sweden and just say, hey, what are you doing in your career, was something that wasn't affordable to people even 15 years ago. It was hard then. I was laughing the other day. They were saying something about data rates. And I said, wow, I forgot you used to have to calculate out how much data you were using a month and not to waste it. And, you'd have to buy more. And now you just call, Zoom, whatever it is. So the technology has been impactful also. And then lastly has been just the world changing. In how we're doing everything in what's out there and all of these startups that are becoming successful and becoming big businesses. So I think your study is right on and is really just affirming what we're seeing and how we're going to do that. So I as you can tell, I'm very excited about your study.
Which is wonderful.
Our poor listeners are going, oh my gosh, what is all this? The point of all of this is that you, listener, have to think through what are you doing next and how are you getting there? And what's really important is not just how you get there in terms of learning and knowledge and credentials, but also in how you align your experiences and what it is that you want to look at and who it is that you want to be and what it is that you want to do. Which brings me to your book that's coming out, Connie, because I'm very excited about your book. And so talk to us a little bit about the focus of that and how this all kind of feeds into it.
Absolutely. This all has been a culmination of me really observing, studying, partaking, and how work has changed. I chose the corporate path. Since then, it's been an opportunity for me to objectively observe and analyze what's been going on. Because as you know, Cher, as somebody who's also decided to take a different path, you realize there are so many more expansive ways to craft one's career into what you may want it to be now. And because both of us have had the opportunity to work with a broad range of generations, we see how each of them think differently and approach things differently. So this book called Building the Business of You, a system to align passion and growth potential through your own career mashup, is really first a explanation on what I believe is now the future of work, what the implication is, and what you can do about that to fully achieve your potential. And to start, what is the future of work? What's been going on? There's an overarching term that I use, which is fluidity. What's happened as a result of technology, and I was there early on and saw how it was shifting behavior, it's created a dynamic in one's personal and professional life such that you now have to think and do dynamically and fluidly. If you think about what the pandemic has done, your work life and your home life are now combined into one. You have to seamlessly switch between being a parent, if you happen to be a parent, which I am, to then switching to being a podcaster, which Cher and I are, to then switching to being a manager of your team, or if you are a marketing manager or a product manager, whatever profession you have multiple roles now. And you have to seamlessly context switch between all of your roles at any moment of the day based on what the need is, because change is constant and uncertainty is the new certainty. We also look at the proliferation of technology or tools, the proliferation of tools and different processes. So for many, the tool set isn't Microsoft Office Suite. As you know, it's not Outlook. PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. That's not it. You may now have 8 to 10 tool sets that you use. And if you are a consultant, you're a freelancer, you have multiple clients, each client has a different suite of tools that they use. So you may have the Google App Suite coupled with Slack, coupled with Basecamp, with Dropbox, with Jira, if you're a developer, and you have to seamlessly switch between all of them. And you might have 10 email addresses. So you have to flip through 10 inboxes in whatever format you do to be really effective. And of course, you're using your phone. Your phone has already combined everything in your personal and professional life, and you are constantly changing what that interface is going to be. So you're switching all the time. But even if you think about location, prior to the pandemic, people were requesting, almost demanding, particularly the younger generation, I should say millennials or Gen Zers, they want to have flexibility to work wherever, whenever. Now it's the case, but folks may want to be fluid between, part of the time I want to work from home, but then, you know what? Oh, I can now go into the office. Oh, well, then I can switch to another mile, go to a coffee shop. But what you see is that macro environment where you need to be aware of the constant change and switch between those different states, driving it all the way down to you as an individual, because now people are not looking to conform. They're looking to express who they are, and who they are is not one dimensional. In fact, people are very multifaceted and they want to express all of them, which leads to the really important concept of the book. What this fluidity all leads to is people, individuals, workers want to create their own career mashup. We are not one thing anymore. I'm sure many of you have seen on LinkedIn, as you've connected with new people or wanting to create new connections, the titles are not one specific title that reflects you. You have people who have 5, 6, 7 titles or reflections of what you've done or awards, but whether you're an author, a speaker, a CEO, a manager, a DJ, whatever it is, you want to be able to show everyone what you've done. The reality is many of us have had a lot of different interests when we were younger. Now, we have a dynamic where people want to parallel path multiple things. You see folks having their maybe primary job, but a lot of people doing a side hustle or maybe multiple side hustles, of which they do that on their off time, or maybe they're doing it now during work. The point is they are pursuing something else, which may become their full-time profession. That mashup really can take 2 forms. It can be one of a portfolio career, which people may have heard of. So they're not just doing one specific job. Maybe they're choosing to do a lot of different things that brings income streams, helps you diversify your revenue streams, actually helps you in the end manage risk, but lets you be all of you. So no longer are you right brain or left brain, you're whole brain. Another form of a mashup is you leveraging all these different skills, interests, experiences, jobs that you've ever had in the past. So those of you who have been nonlinear by nature, you've wanted to test and learn and try, those experiences can all come to bear in a new role where that expansiveness in your thinking and experiences could help you be incredibly powerful and unique in this new job. Because you will be able to look at a problem, think of the problem, solve the problem differently because of everything else that you've done. So my key advice to people is that this windy journey that you may have had where it doesn't show this very specific linear progression, and in the past it has felt as if, what am I doing? There's nothing wrong. In fact, it's just you trying to identify those areas that really turn you on. Once you know that, inevitably you're going to probably focus on it, build up those skills, become potentially an expert in it, but it's because you're passionate about that. But yet we all know that at some point you want to learn more, because we have a culture now that's all about growing and building, and it's defaulting to more of a growth mindset. So inevitably, at some point, you're like, oh, you know what? I've mastered this. I like it. But now I want to do something else. So now you're kind of creating a talent stack. You're adding to that, building on top of it. It doesn't mean that you're not a researcher, or you're not a professor. You're professor plus. You're researcher plus. In the past, it was or. Like we're all forced to conform and be this or that because you had to specialize and go narrow and deep. You don't have to anymore. In fact, being more of a generalist where you are broad and deep is a strength in the research. In fact, many of those who study the future of work talk about the importance of creating it's the super job. It's combining all those skills. So for engineers, for example, you may be amazing at coding, but if you can't communicate what you're trying to do to a broader audience, and now we're all virtual, how are you going to get a group of people to support this compelling product you're trying to build? You're going to be limited. So you now have to have the soft skills as well as the hard skills to truly progress at the rate that you may want to progress in. Candidly, for companies, they need that too. So I think really that's the key thing, is that you have this shift from narrow and deep to needing to also be broad and strategic in addition to being a specialist.
So I love the term talent stack, because I think instructional designers, people that work in curriculum content, people that work in K through 12 who inherit those roles but never get paid for them or never really get the title. They're a teacher that takes on extra duties. All of those people have been stacking their talent. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of K through 12 teachers who are leaving education because of trying to work through the whole pandemic situation. So they're thinking, well, maybe I want to go do this, not only because I really love designing curriculum, I really love designing online, but also because I could do this and I could have a different schedule. I wouldn't be tied into I go at 7 and I'm, have to stay after school for activities and, I'm gone 12 hours a day kind of thing. So, we're starting to see that people have been talent stacking and didn't even realize it, because we've all been in that situation, particularly when you're starting in your career, where all those new projects end up on your plate because you're the new person. And I tell people constantly, I'm like, when you get that thrown at you, take it. When there's a messy project, take it. Use that as an experience builder, because the next job you could say, I'm the person that fixed this situation. That's impressive to them. They may not have the same situation, but they want to know that there's someone who can come in and fix something. And that's oftentimes what you don't see. You get the same rhetoric at the interview table of, I'm very good at this, I'm a people person. It used to drive me crazy when people would say that. I'm like, what does that mean? I tell the story, and this was a long, long time ago, but we used to have an intake phone. This is before help desks. And so, you called 1-800 number and it got answered. So we were hiring for it. And the woman that we were interviewing, we were down to, the only thing we had to do was reconvene after she left, everyone agree, and then make the offer. And you could tell by looking around the table, everybody loved her. She's going to be fantastic. This is going to be great. She's a people person. You can see it. She's warm, blah, 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 blah. And we get to the last question. And somebody says, so in your current role, what's the thing you hate the most? And she said, answering the phone. And you could have heard a pin drop, because I'm thinking, we've just spent an hour with you clearly discussing, you'll get 200 to 300 calls a day and you're going to have to reroute them. And, and rerouting at that time was on paper. You didn't have a switchboard. You hand wrote out tickets and put them places and stuff. Some are just phone messages for people because everything came through one phone line. And she said that, and literally it just like the air sucked out of the room. She didn't see it, and she was like, thank you. And she walked out, and we were all like, what just happened? So we ended up offering it to somebody else who turned out to be fabulous, but was number 2 in the list, wasn't our number 1 candidate at that point. And so when our person called number 1 to say, we're not going to offer it to you, we're offering it to somebody else, she asked, was there anything she could do better? And they said, well, kind of, here's what happened. And They just said, well, you gave an answer that was pertinent to what we do. And she said, oh, you mean that last question? And she said, well, the truth is I don't like answering the phone. She said, but if you're going to make me do it, I'll do it. So we dodged a bullet that day and we didn't realize it. And so part of what you look for when you interview now is, what are those potential bullets? So when someone says to me, oh, I'm a people person, 30 years later, I still go, yeah, that's not a good enough answer for me. I want to hear how you talk to people and what you enjoy and what's the best part. It's helping them figure out how to make this work, and give me some examples, what you've done. It's changed. And so when you can say to me, you've done something and you've fixed a situation or you helped someone work through it, that tells me you have that talent stack, that you've gone in depth and learned how to do a particular skill, but you're also broad enough to understand how it impacts everything else. Why it's important that you've done something with that one person has made such a difference. So I love that. And I love the title of your book, Building the Business of You, because I think for any of our listeners, whether you're just starting out in your career or you're in your advanced stages and starting to think about what's next, I think there's going to be some valuable points in here, because it's going to allow you to reframe how you're looking at things and get out of your old mindset of what you should be doing. If you're in an advanced stage, you're thinking, I should be retiring. But what does that mean in this day and age? There's a lot of phase 2 people who are starting a new business, doing something they've always wanted to do. Retirement is no longer sitting at home and watching TV. That whole mindset of how you retire has changed from 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. So what are some helpful tidbits that they're going to find in the book that are really going to kind of resonate with our listeners?
So another key aspect of the book is this system. It's a 5-part system to help you develop a plan to establish what that career mashup may be. Maybe you already have been ideating on those things that you want to pursue, but you haven't been able to define in a more clearer sense what to do about it. So it provides a systematic approach to enable you to understand how to gain that traction. If you were to take a step back as an individual and realize what's happening today is that you are a product on the web. You're actually a business on the web, whether you like it or not. Anyone and everyone can go on to Google or just type in your name, see what results come up. They go to LinkedIn, any of the social channels, and formulate an opinion about you. As such, they're defining you, whether you like it or not. So it's really important to make sure that you establish your brand, because your brand is the new resume on LinkedIn or any of those other channels, and convey what you want to convey. A lot of that starts with defining who you are, what you do, what makes you different, and why. That's what businesses have to do. Businesses have to have a plan to achieve their goals. You now, as an individual, need to do the same thing. You need to have a plan to achieve your goals. Everyone has dreams. Everyone has visions of where they want to be, but it requires having an approach, a systematic plan and approach to enable you to get there. That involves really analysis, planning, and execution. It's all those foundational skills that many of us have applied in our jobs, but maybe haven't had the opportunity to do strategic planning as a role. Candidly, I didn't do strategy when I started off. I did marketing research. I didn't even really know what strategy was. It wasn't until I had a boss who saw my potential and told me to work on a project that it all came together, and I learned on the job. But I see how many people haven't had that opportunity for mentorship or haven't had that opportunity to be taught how to do that. So in this book, the process is First, the first component is spying the trends. It's just the research and analysis that you need to do. Look at the market, look at your industry, look at competition, understand what your peers are, understand you to see what's going on. And not just identify, oh, here's the information. It's analyzing and saying, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to my industry? What does that mean to my role? What does that mean to me? Once you have that coupled with what your dreams and visions may be, you look at that together, start to create a plan. Goals, objectives, strategies, tactics. So that's in the creating your compass section. And the reason why I use the word compass is because nothing is a fixed point anymore. Your goals will change. Inevitably, things change all the time. So what you may want in your 20s is probably going to be different than what you want in your 30s, which will be different than what you want in your 40s and so forth. But after that, what inhibits us from moving forward typically is fear. So we have a component in there, which is called preparing for change. All of us get super excited to do something new when we dream about it. But once we start, we may succumb to the fear of failure. So we talk about how to overcome that. The fourth and fifth components is networking and building your skills. Execution. You need people to help you realize whatever it is you're going to do, no matter what. And people may be networking to understand how to break into a new industry, maybe networking to understand what a new industry has, or new jobs, or just even learning about it for that matter. But you then also have those skills that you need to build. You're always building skills, just like any company is augmenting their capabilities. There's no one capability that they stay with forever. Then they obviously, if they do, then they become obsolete, which we've seen several times because of technology. So you as a individual, as a business now need to do the same thing. And those skills are hard skills and soft skills. Everybody understands what soft skills are and probably realize, oh, I can go to Coursera, I can go to Udemy and go to YouTube. That's great. But if you don't have the communication skills, the speaking skills, all those things we talked about, right? EQ, which is one of the areas we focus on quite a bit. EQ is so important. Emotional intelligence, for those who may not know what EQ is. But that is being able to have self-awareness of your emotions, your behavior, but also understand the emotions and behaviors and actions of others that you work with and managing them. This is where office politics comes into play, which many people have dealt with. But you need to know how to read the room and understand yourself to be able to effectively influence and impact people to support eventually your vision, plan, and goals to getting you to your career mashup that you want.
I think it is so exciting for people to take a step back and see this through your eyes and be able to put together their plan. Because for most of us, we didn't have a plan, or we didn't really put together a formal plan. You know, we may have had kind of some idea of where we wanted to go, but it was a little more ambiguous than what this is. And the fact that you're asking people to think about these things. So I was at a conference in 2019, the last time we actually traveled, and it was very interesting to me. It was a partially academic and partially corporate conference. So you have a very strange mix of people that are there. And a gentleman walked up to me and he said, "Hello." He said, "I enjoyed your presentation." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Do you have a card?" And I said, "Yes." And I handed him a card. And he goes, "Okay, I will reach back out and we will network at another time." And he turned around and he walked away. And I was like, well, that's interesting. But, you know, there were a few other people standing around, you know how people do at the end of a presentation. So I thought maybe he didn't want to take all my time. Other people were waiting. Well, throughout the conference, I kind of started watching him. And he does the same thing every single time.
It's robotic.
So sure enough, get home, a few weeks later, he reaches out and he says, very, very open to talking and creative ideas. And, you know, we just had a beautiful conversation. But I said to him at the end, I said, "I have to ask your methodology. Why did you do this?" And he says, "Because I am a product of technology." He said, "And so when I am on Zoom, when I am on email," he said, "when I am on some sort of audio call, I am fine." He said, "I do not network well at all in rooms of people." He said, I learned that many years ago. I made an attempt to fix it. I realized it's not fixable. So I had to work around it. So my goal when I walk into a room, whether it's a presentation or the big where everyone general session or maybe the general session luncheon, he said, I set a goal of how many business cards I'm going to collect that day. He said, and it's either because they're people that were speakers or they were people that were maybe at a table outside, vendors or whatever, that I want to know more about the product, the person, or their topic. He said, and once I set that, then I go in and that's my goal. He said, so I came into your room. There were 10 people I wanted to meet, including you. He said, so you're at the end. That's easy. So that means I have to get around to 9 people before it starts. He said, wow. And I get those 9, and then I talk to you, and I got my 10, and I've met my goal. He said, because I know once I get home, I can talk to you, and I know we can have a great conversation, and we can work on things, and we can do things together. He said, but I can't function and do that in the room because it's not who I am. I found that extremely fascinating because he took a skill that he cannot master, and he altered it to fit his needs.
Absolutely. And the fact that he has self-awareness to begin with, to realize where he may not be able to master that skill, which is where it starts. You just have to know what you're strong at and what you're not. And sometimes you might need other people to do that 360-degree review of you to make you aware of what they are. But the fact is, he put together a plan, a very clear plan based on that goal, what I'm going to do, and executed. But the fact that he executed, he now has 10 new great connections of which can help him in the future. And they sound like they're authentic connections, which is great.
And he said, the good side of it, which no one would really say, there's a good or bad side. He said, but oftentimes you meet a lot of people at a conference. He said, I watch people and they meet a lot of people, but they don't really have any need to meet them. He's like, what's the result other than saying, I have 50 people in my network? He's like, but then if you work on a project, none of those 50 people are of value because they're not interested in what you're doing. They're not experienced in what you're looking at. And he said, so I'm very methodical about it. He said, my network is strong and my network is tight. And he does. He writes papers because he's working from home, is starting to set up his own consulting. And so as he does that, he can just reach out to people and say, hey, have you seen anything on this? I'm looking for this. And he has this strong network of people who are going, ooh, so what are you working on now? It's a very different approach, but he figured out what he needed to do. And so he is surviving, living in a technical world, being from a technology background, adapting his soft skill, and having a plan in place. So I just thought that was really fascinating because I think he's overcome what many people struggle with one way or the other. When is your book going to be out?
It's going to be out February 11th, and it will be available on Amazon, and we are looking to have it up on Barnes & Noble as well.
Woohoo! So listeners, you definitely will hear this before February 11th. I would definitely encourage you to get a copy of this. Obviously, you need to read the whole book, but definitely flip back and look to the plan so you can start kind of having those things in the back of your head of what you've done. I think particularly in the technology and the ed tech field, oftentimes people feel disjointed because they do move around a lot. They do a lot of different projects. One day they're building a course, and the next day they're doing training, and the next day they're off doing something else. And I think oftentimes, I know they'll say, I don't know how to put a portfolio together because it's difficult to explain what I do. Well, what you do is you manage multiple projects. What you do is you have to take someone's vision and trajectory of a project and actually make that into a visual and deliverable concept that can be assessed and have outcomes. There's a lot of things that you do. You may have to learn new software in order to make that happen. We've all inherited a project that was already started. And so you're like, great, I don't know how to use that. So I guess I'm going to now have to learn to use the software before I can even get started on finishing the project that has a deadline. So, all of these things, again, going back to your term, talent stack, all of these things are stackable, but you have to go back and look at it with outside eyes. You just think of it as doing work every day, but someone else would say, wow, you have this skill set and this skill set and you're doing this. So I really think the book is going to give an opportunity for people to really look at themselves differently and really start to assess what it is they're doing. The other thing that you mentioned that came to mind was, as you're talking about fluidity and planning for the future, a really fascinating group to watch are seasoned NFL players. You will see the very top NFL players all have multiple streams of income. And it's not because of who they are or who they play for. It's because they're planning for the future. Look at the really good ones who are doing endorsements, who are also going to school behind the scenes. One of the players, I think he is on the Patriots, he just finished his doctorate. He has been going to school the entire time he has been playing. So he plays in the fall and he goes to school during the off season. It's taken him longer than usual, but he's finished his PhD because his intent is to be a university professor when he's done. So he's been working towards that goal all along. You see others who are starting small companies. Larry Fitzgerald with the Arizona Cardinals has started a travel company. So it's an excursion. You want to go to Africa and do the tours, or maybe, you've never been to the castles in Scotland. And so they're all preparing because they recognize their career could come to an end tomorrow, or they could play out their career, but they're eventually going to be older and physically just unable to keep that up. So they're planning, they're thinking about it, and they're thinking about all the things that I love, that I want to do. And they're still having to go to school. They're still having to get their credentials, because you're not suddenly going to start buying houses from somebody because he played for, your favorite team. He still has to understand all the real estate laws. He still has to be licensed. I remember years ago taking a shuttle. We were on a trip and the guy driving the shuttle was a retired NFL player. So we get to talking to him, and turns out he has bought like 10 vans. He was talking about what his intentions with these 10 shuttles.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is so great.
And I asked him, I said, so what made you think of this? And he goes, honestly, he said, when I was in high school, I drove a cab. He said, and I loved it. I met people from all over the world. I heard fascinating stories. He said, I learned of places. He said, I grew up in a small area with no money. He said, I never traveled till I became a player. He said, I didn't know how to get on a plane. I didn't know what to pack. He said, the other guys were telling me how this works, put my seatbelt on. He's like, I was a kid from low income. He said, I didn't know any of this stuff. He goes, I never stayed in a hotel till I played. He said, and I couldn't believe that people came and brought you fresh towels and did all of this stuff. He said, it was fascinating to me. He said, so when I was driving a cab, I would ask people questions, where they were from, how did they get here? He said, and I learned from all of these stories. He said, and I learned of places I wanted to go visit. He said, so I started keeping a list of, oh, this person was from here, and that sounds like a really neat place. He said, and then when I had money on the off season, I would travel to those places. He said, so I decided, well, why not just keep driving and hearing more stories? And he's actually writing a book about them now. We've kept in contact over the years. And he's writing a book about all the stories he's heard. So, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the opportunities.
You don't. And what's important for people to realize is that building the business of you is really going to be an ongoing iteration of your best self, whatever it may be. So this system, while we are showing you the linear components of it to help everyone understand the foundation, the trends, that obviously will feed your compass. But as you network, that will also feed your compass. But once you look at your compass, you may realize, wait, I do need to network with somebody. So it's really this cyclical, dynamic, iterative process, because you're constantly planning. You're strategically planning all the time. And based on the inputs that you get, day-to-day conversations, the activities that you're doing, it will create inspiration. It will create motivation for you to think differently, operate differently. But what it does, it helps you connect the dots in a way that you might not have before. It was really interesting when you talked about how people tend to talk about what they do What we want to help you do, what this book is trying to help you do, is go from what and articulating the tactics, the activities to the so what, and then now what. That's where you start to think on a higher order level. That's when you start to realize, oh, here are the white space opportunities for what it is that I do, that I bring this value that other people don't have, because it's in the way you do it and it's in the way you think that brings power to really your uniqueness and ability, not the fact that you do instructional design.
Exactly.
You do so much more than that. So it's helping you think differently. So it's still analytical, but it's the analysis with the implications, the higher order implications. This is where strategy comes from. This is what companies do. It's like, yes, there's all this activity happening. What does that mean for our business? Will that help us grow our business? Will that inhibit our business? Do we need new people to help us get to where we want to go? Do we need new technologies? Do we need a different process? All this information that you may be acquiring already. And you read it, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Get to the meaning. Get to the higher order meaning. That will help you be much more focused on what it is you can do and may love to do. And when you can tie that all together, you really can bridge that gap between strategy and execution.
It is absolute. And for our audience, I mean, all of you out there in EdTech are in this perfect space right now. The world, as crazy as it is, has been kind to us in the sense of virtual learning, virtual reality, live sessions. All of these things are coming together. So track what you're doing, track your sense, but track your purpose and where you're going. I'm so excited that you joined us today, Connie. You and I could talk about this book forever, but I do want to bring you back down the road once the book's been out a while, because I think it's really going to be a game changer for people. I encourage all of you, February 11th is the launch. It will be available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Be sure to get your copy. Be sure to get your pencil and paper out and start planning your map. We so appreciate all of you joining us today on EdTech Speaks. And we want you to know that we are available on Spotify, Audible, Apple, iHeartRadio, Google, Acast, and Stitcher. So please make sure to share our link when it comes out and share with your friends. We'll make sure and have all the information available on our site, so you can also reach out to Connie and find out more about the book and about her organization. What is your website?
So my management consultancy, the website is flywheelassociates.com. For the podcast, where it's that e-learning platform, and we will continually provide more information on the survey. That is strategicmomentum.co. And for anybody who wants to learn more about the book and even sign up for the wait list, it's bizofyou.co, bizofyou.co.
Woohoo! Get on the wait list, because you really want to get this early and get started. Thanks to all of you again for listening. Connie, thank you for joining me today. As always, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.